Hi, welcome back to our next session of Esther. Remember when we left Esther, she had arranged for a banquet for Haman to come and the king to come, and she was going to ask the king to save her people. Meanwhile, when Haman left that banquet, he ran across Mordecai, and he was ticked that Mordecai would not bow down to him. So he had this gallows built. And in the morning, before Esther can even have the banquet or talk to the king, Mordecai is planning to impale him on a pole and kill him. So if we're reading and we stop there, we are like, oh no, what's going to happen? We're frantic, we're panicked. So often we feel that way, don't we? We feel panicked and we think, where is God in all this? So when I was thinking about that, I began to look at some other verses that give us information about that. And the first one I came across several times, so it must be important because it keeps cropping up, is Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. We don't have to be afraid, because we know we're never going to be left totally alone and forsaken. Things may not always turn out the way we want. It may be a tough time. We may have some suffering. But the bottom line is we can be strong in the Lord. We can be courageous, even as Esther is being courageous now. I'm sure she doesn't feel courageous. She feels afraid. But she's going ahead because it's the right thing to do to save her people. So that was one verse I came across. And the other one is interesting to me because of Haman making all these plans. So far, he's made this plan to annihilate the Jews in about 11 months. And he's also now made a second plan to build a gallows or a pole and kill Mordecai in the morning. He's making a lot of plans here. But listen to what Proverbs 19:21 says. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Haman can have all the plans he wants, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. So right now, it doesn't look like there's any way of saving Mordecai because Haman's going to go there first thing in the morning. And Esther isn't going to be with the king till later in the day at a banquet. So it doesn't look like there's any way that he could be saved. So watch what happens in chapter 6. And look again at the idea that a coincidence is not always a coincidence. It's mostly God's hand at work. That night, the king had trouble sleeping. So he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door of the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. Now remember, this was way back in chapter 2, I think. Let's see. Chapter 2. At the end of chapter 2, we remember Mordecai just happened to be on duty there at the king's gate, and he overheard these people. And remember, at the last verse of that particular section, it said, this was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. We called them the annals, the history annals. And he, of course, when he can't sleep, he's restless, it's almost morning, and he can't sleep, and so he says, hey, bring me the history books. I want to hear about my reign, my power, my glory, all the wonderful things that have happened while I've been king. So that's good reading for him. And he says to the servant, bring that book and read to me, because I can't sleep anyway. Okay, so he hears the history of when Mordecai saved his life by telling him about the plot that these two eunuchs had. So then he asks this this servant. What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked, and the attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. Now, all of a sudden, we know it's morning because Haman is there. Who is that in the outer court? The king inquired. As it happened, just so happened, coincidence, Haman had just arrived to the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole that he had prepared. So the attendants replied to the king, Haman is out in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? In his pride, we know what Haman's going to think. Haman's going to think, I think he's talking about me. Haman thought to himself, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? So he replied, if the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with the royal emblem on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the official shout as they go, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. So Haman is giving the king a suggestion about something he thinks would be pretty cool. If the king dressed him up in his robes, put him on a royal horse, and had an official walk before him and say, look how much the king is pleased with this person. This is how the king honors someone. So watch the king's response. He doesn't know that Haman is going to ask for Mordecai to be impaled. Excellent, the king said to Haman. Quick, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate at the palace. Leave out nothing that you have suggested. This is ironic, is it not? Here we see how God has turned the tide. The person who was trying to bring honor to himself, Haman, has been humbled. And the person who was humbling himself before God in sackcloth and ashes has been exalted. He's the one who's being put on the horse. He's the one who's wearing the royal robe. He's the one who's going to be paraded around the town to show people that he is in the king's favor. I don't think we can ever imagine how hard that would have been for Haman to do, because he must have been furious. So let's see if he did it. Verse 11. So Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square, shouting, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. And afterward Mordecai returned to the palace gate. But Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. I can imagine he would be. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. And while they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and took Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. There's something about this kind of a miracle that even unbelievers see that it has to be more than coincidence. And his wife and his friends are telling Haman, look, you're after Mordecai, but it's obvious he's in God's favor. Because look what God did. You're never going to win against this guy. He's got God on his side. They don't mention the word God, but it's quite obvious that they think it will be fatal if he continues. They are very prophetic in saying this. This man is of Jewish faith. You will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. They warn him. If you keep this up, it's going to be you who's going to die. A very prophetic word here that the advisors and the wife tell him. I don't think Haman's going to listen. Haman is going to now go off to the banquet to see Esther. And this whole thing of coincidence or happenstance, it just happened that the king couldn't sleep. It just happened that he wanted to listen to the history books. It just happened that the part of the history books that the servant read was the part about Mordecai. It just happened that Haman arrived in the morning, and before he could tell the king his plan to kill Mordecai, the king orders him to give Mordecai honor. These things just happened, right? And so it's not coincidence that they happened. It was God's way of protecting Mordecai and giving Esther the time to fulfill her plan to save her people. So, another instance in Esther where God's name is not mentioned, but boy, his power is evident in a big way. And what I love the most is the fact that the person who was full of pride has been humbled, and the person who was humbled, God has lifted up. Just like we said last time, I get down and he lifts me up. Have a wonderful day today. Bye-bye.